Reflections with theologian Father James Bacik, lecturer and campus minister at the University of Toledo.
I think that communal aspect of the whole thing is very important, especially because you can feel so isolated in all of us. It's important for all of us to know there's people who share our values.
Today on Reflections, Father Bacik talks with Pam Hollenbeck, who is director of the Peace Council of Northwest Ohio. Father Bacik and Mrs. Hollenbeck will discuss the Great Peace March, a personal reflection. And now, here is Father Bacik.
Pam, I'm glad that you are taking some time out of your busy schedule of being a mother to come and speak with me on this program. I've invited you because of your involvement on the Great Peace March and your great interest in the peace question over the years. I must say you've always struck me as one of the fine peacemakers in the world, a gentle spirit, and I know you bring a very personal concern to all of this. So I'm glad that you've taken time to be with me on the program and like to talk to you a little bit about it. You were very involved in the Great Peace March, weren't you? Why don't you just tell me a little bit about how all of that happened for you? Maybe we should locate ourselves just a little bit. The Great Peace March was here in the city of Toledo not long ago, and a group of marchers going across the country and trying to rally support for the peace movement. They're going to end up in Washington. When is it? In the middle of November, I think?
November 15th.
November 15th, yes. Well, why don't you tell me a little bit about your involvement in this Great Peace March?
It started out as curiosity and grew day by day until I ended up marching with them for one whole day and a half of another day, and allowing my 9-year-old daughter to continue with them 2 more days beyond that with friends. But really, we started out as tourists going out to Swanton.
You heard that they were coming into the area,
right?
And were sort of interested.
Right, we were real interested, and had even sent out letters to other people to tell them about it. That we were that interested. We wanted our friends and people that we knew to become involved with it too.
And what did you encounter when you went out there then?
Well, we went out really just to walk around and quietly observe what it was all about and see what the people were like. But they put a great deal of emphasis into greeting people, showing them around, telling us what it was all about, answering any of our questions, and really that's really why they're walking, is to meet me, my kids, those of us who show up on the road.
And to talk about the whole question of peace.
Right.
Yeah, you know, Pam, I'm thinking that of the great need along this line. I think that as we look at our society as a whole today, we see people failing to face up to the nuclear question. I know a political candidate told me that he almost never runs into anyone asking him questions about peace and war or speaking about the nuclear threat or wanting to know where he stands on weapons issues. Very seldom encountering any interest like that. I know the Yale psychologist Robert J. Lifton talks a lot about psychic numbness, which he thinks afflicts us. He's the one who did some of the studies in Nagasaki and Hiroshima of the survivors of the nuclear weapons attack there, and found out this whole phenomenon of psychic numbness, where the threat is just so great and the topic is so vast and the fears connected with it are so tremendous that people simply withdraw from the question, that simply are not interested in it, or they won't look at it, they don't want to talk about it. It might come back and haunt them in other ways through nightmares or dreams or strange fantasies or unexplained anxieties. But Lifton thinks that this threat is in the air and that we're really not facing up to it the way we should. And it strikes me that the Great Peace March has something to do with this whole raising of consciousness on the question of nuclear warfare and the great dangers of it. Tell me a little bit about your own reactions to this. We had a service out at Lourdes, a prayer service connected with all of this peace march and so on, where many of the marchers joined with us, and I thought it was a beautiful service. I had the opportunity to say a few words, and so did you, and I thought you made some fine comments. You want to tell me a little bit about how you prepared for your talk and kind of things that points that you tried to make, the major points?
Well, I prepared with a lot of anxiety. I said yes to doing a reflection on a reading, and I felt good about that, but I envisioned a group of people outside in the grass in a circle, real informal. When I discovered we were going to be on stage, I really panicked. So I had to go through a whole, why did I say yes in the first place? Because I wanted in some way to touch the lives of the peace marchers the way they were touching mine. So I persevered and did my reflection, and a marvelous thing came from that. As I was doing the reflection, the lights were out. I couldn't see any faces. I had no idea if people were rolling their eyes and falling asleep. And afterwards, people came up to me and were asking if I was a marcher. Marchers were asking me, when did I join the march? So I thought that was a wonderful affirmation. And they felt that I had addressed their issues, when in truth I was addressing my own issues, that we have to bring peace into the daily minutes of our lives. That if we can't feel good about standing in line at the grocery store and in the traffic, those kinds of things, then what is the point of worrying about global nuclear disarmament, that it has to permeate our lives? So it was a wonderful thing for me to have these marchers say, oh, you spoke right to us. And in fact, a lady took my real rough notes, Xeroxed them off, and gave them to quite a few of the marchers. So I felt real good about it.
Oh, that's tremendous, yes. And my recollection is that you did speak personally and try to bring the whole peace question down to the individual person and change of heart and so on, which I think is, an important part of what this peacemaking is all about. I think there is a question of personal conversion involved, that we have to turn ourselves around and to begin to take more seriously the gospel message. In other words, in the scriptures, we find Jesus being portrayed as a nonviolent person. We find him as one who says, put aside the sword. If you take up the sword, you're going to perish by the sword. He calls upon his own followers to set aside their violent tendencies. He encountered people in an open way. He made people feel good about themselves. He liberated them to become peacemakers in their own way. And so I think that he calls upon us to be peacemakers, and that requires sort of a conversion. He said, blessed are the peacemakers. And so I guess one of the questions we all have is where we're going to start with that and how we're going to go about that. And so I think your example of trying to remain peaceful in some of the stressful situations of life strikes me as one, at least one way of going about it. And I think that was one of the points you were trying to bring out, wasn't it, in your own talk?
It was. And it struck a chord for a lot of the marchers, and I think non-marchers there too. I think the symbol of the walk is so wonderful because it is one step at a time that they're making their journey. Each of those steps they try and do thoughtfully. They do a lot of meditating. They try and get focused in lots of different ways. The mornings are real silent, people trying to get just that centering on peace to start their day.
And they probably all do that in their own way because they're from various traditions. One of the speakers was an Episcopalian deaconess, as I recall it. And I think there were people from various religious traditions. Why don't you tell me a little bit about the kind of people who were on the march? Do you remember, or did some of them stand out, individuals that you met who seemed interesting? Or I heard of one guy that gave up, I think, a very lucrative job. After all, the ones who began the march at the beginning had to give up, 9 months of their lives in one way or another. And I think that by the time they got to Toledo, my recollection was that there was something between 500 and 700 of them.
That's right.
Not so?
That's true.
So they come from various backgrounds, and the one thing that binds them together is this commitment to peace, to overcoming the nuclear threat in our world. And I found that I only met a few of them briefly, and I think you had a much greater opportunity. you have any strong feelings about that, or people that struck you forcefully?
The people that impressed me the most were the moms. We had 6 people stay at our house on Friday night, and one had a 9-year-old son. Both women were named Katie's. One Katie has a 9-year-old son whom I played with my children out at Peace Camp all afternoon, and it was real neat to meet his mother that night and find out they were coming back to our house for dinner and to spend the night. The other Katie has just joined the march in Iowa. She has a 2-year-old little girl, Leah, and I don't know if you can imagine, there are no showers. Occasionally a school or a fire station allows them to use their facilities to take a shower. So bedtimes at camp, out in Swanton, the mosquitoes were just fierce. And it was starting to get cool at nights. And there are these big water tanks that pump the water where people do their evening ablutions. And you're trying to get a little 2-year-old into pajamas, into a tent. There's still people singing. There's still a lot of things going on. I tried to imagine doing that every night for 9 months, and I just had such a strong feeling of compassion for these women. So I was real glad.
And they have their kids with them during this time.
There are 40 children on the march.
40 children that have to be cared for and each day, and something done with them, right?
Right.
Throughout the day.
Now that's shared. Excuse me. They have 4 buses, a daycare bus and 3 school buses, which are school buses converted to classrooms.
Your voice is going on you, Pam. Why don't you get a drink of water there or something so that your voice will continue to work. But, I mean, the point you're trying to make is that this is really difficult for these people on the march, and that just the living conditions are hard, simple things of taking care of oneself and so on.
I think there's 2 difficult things. One is the actual physical taking care of children on the road. And the second one, for me, would be learning to trust all day long while you're either a walker or a worker that other people are taking care of your children. And basically, you're up by 5. The morning call is 5 o'clock. Dinner or breakfast is over by 6:30.
Now, where does all this food come from and so on?
There are incredible semis that do the food storage and preparation and cleanup. And as a long-term marcher, you work 2 days, you march 2 days, you rest a day. And you can sign up for what you want, cleaning latrines, cooking, cleanup. At night, they have people walking around patrolling just to see that everyone's taken care of at night. You can be a bus driver, a school teacher, a daycare worker. You can be an outreach person going and talking to schools or groups. You can be an advanced person that goes to the next town to find out where people could go and talk. On a 15-mile march each day, every 4 miles is a rest stop. Someone has to scout out every 4 miles a farmyard, a parking lot where they can put the porta potties and the fresh fruit for people to eat while they take their break. And someone has to be willing to have 200 people spend 15 minutes there on their break. So there's all kinds of work that needs to be done. You can't have your children clinging to your skirts while you're getting those things done, or even along the march. Like I walked on Route 2. The traffic on Route 2 is real dangerous to have children tagging along. So those children are in the daycare or school buses. There's school every day, all summer long, all weekend long. It wasn't just a lark for those kids to go along. They really are working hard, as well as having a terrific geography lesson. But you have to trust that these other people are taking care of your children, and I think that's it takes a lot of courage.
Yeah, quite a community spirit built up among the marchers, didn't it? Which strikes me as one of the important things in this whole peace movement, that in general, I think we could say that people often feel isolated who are working for peace, who are constantly at it, hitting their heads against brick walls and finding that their best efforts are thwarted. And am I a lone soul in all of this and trying to work for peace in our world? And so I think that the whole community side is really important in all of this, that there needs to be a pulling together, a sense of solidarity if we're going to accomplish something, that we know that others are with us. And I think that in the marchers sort of had that kind of catalyst effect on others. As they come through a community, I think that's what they hope to happen. They hope the churches will come together around this issue, that individuals in the community will find a new support from the marchers interacting with them, that maybe new peace groups or coalitions will be formed. I think that communal aspect of the whole thing is very important, especially because you can feel so isolated in all of this. It's important for all of us to know there's people who share our values. I suppose the peace marchers themselves have a clear focus, and I imagine that, however, within it you find some diversity, and you're not going to ever have 500 people together where everyone thinks exactly the same about every issue. So I'm sure they've had their rough spots like that and difficult things to get over. But the dominant impression that you get in talking to them and seeing them is that they've somehow pulled this together. And I might say out of great adversity. Remember when the Peace March first started and they had all these grandiose plans, and it had all kind of problems connected with it, and they were not able to get it going. In fact, it looked like the whole thing was going to fail, as I recall. Do you remember those origins, the beginnings of the whole thing?
It was just 2 weeks into the march. I think they're on the edge of the desert. Barstow.
They started out in California.
Right, L.A. area. Yeah. And the money was gone. They used up all this money. The original plan was that there would be paid workers that would take care of all of these functions that keep 600 people on the road. Mm-hmm. That money was used up so quickly, and these people were, I believe, on the edge of the desert when that was announced that it had fallen apart. There was nothing left. And actually the vehicles, their support vehicles, were disappearing. They were being repossessed or whatever, taken right away. And a nucleus of those original people stayed there and decided they were not going to quit, and stayed in that place, reconnoitering, making their plans of how they would make it work as a communal, voluntary, not paid any longer venture. And some of those people had counted on being paid as they went across country. Now they had to, like one man is a piano tuner. I don't know what his original part of the march was going to be. That fell apart. As he walks across America, he asks those of us whom he meets, do we have a piano or friends with pianos? And he goes off and does his professional thing so that he can remain on the march.
It's a quite impressive thing. You know, it strikes a chord in me, a reminder of the biblical notion of the remnant. In the scriptures, there's always this idea that out of the mass of people, some are not faithful and some can't persevere, but there's always this smaller grouping that somehow has extra courage and perseverance and strength. They remain faithful to the ideals. In Israel, it was always thought there's a remnant, a group that will keep the covenant even when others fail. In fact, I think the Essenes that were living in the Dead Sea area thought of themselves that way, as the true faithful Israelites, the remnant. And so maybe we have that kind of point among the marchers here, the people who have somehow persevered and pulled it together. And I think it really was impressive because it was at the verge of losing the whole thing, that the march would die right at the very beginning, 2 weeks into it. And here these people were resourceful and gathered themselves and found ways to continue on.
I think it was significant, too, that they were at the edge of the desert, that they knew if they plowed ahead that they weren't going to arrive. In Swanton the next day, where there would be farmers and loving people to take care of them, they were out in the middle of nowhere. But many marchers told me those were the most wonderful days, that they really did have to come together as a group and work things out. And I think the core of that is still very much alive, even though they are now outnumbered by new people who have joined.
How many would have been in that original group that made it all the way?
Around 200.
Uh-huh.
And they expect to expand daily as they get closer to Washington. A lot of people are joining the march now. So that core group really has quite a responsibility and a vision to keep those roots clear while all the new people join.
Yeah, and so then they have been a force for good, and as people see that the thing has some chance of making it and so on, and perhaps making an impact, they are joining up. Do they have a goal for when they get to Washington, do you know, of how many people they would like to have? Or
I never heard any.
Mm-hmm. It's one of the things that struck me about the people from the march who talked at the prayer service that you and I were at, was their sense of openness to the future. That they seemed to have a great sense of limitation of what they might accomplish in all of this. That they knew that perhaps it wouldn't make a whole lot of difference in some ways, or they seemed open. It strikes me again as part of biblical faith as a peacemaker, to be open to an unknown future. We don't know where it's going. We can't program it when you get down to it. And one of the essential things is to be able to sustain the effort without knowing exactly where it goes. And in that sense, I think they symbolize what all of us need as peacemakers, that we're not sure exactly how much we're going to accomplish, and yet we have to keep at it. I know a young man that picked up a phrase that I had used in a homily. I had talked about people being lifelong peacemakers, and he's sort of taken that as one of his goals in life. He talks about, well, when he gets to be an old man, that it would be a great feeling to say, I've spent this many years trying to work for peace. He sees it in those long-term ways. And I think there's something healthy about that. And I picked that up among a lot of the marchers who were limited in their goals and who said, we're just going to keep plodding forward, putting one foot in front of another because we believe something good will happen in all of this. And it's a great lesson for life. I suppose we learn it in a lot of different ways. We talk about the importance of putting one foot in front of the other or taking it one day at a time. I think all of that seems to be part of what is needed. I know in my little talk to the group, I tried to stress that idea of perseverance, of sticking with it, even in the face of failures, because it's right, because to be a peacemaker is the right thing to do. I suppose another thing that struck me about the marchers was their openness or tolerance. I didn't get a sense of self-righteousness among the ones I met, that they realized that people would have different viewpoints and come at it, the question, in different ways. And I found that to be a healthy thing, too. Did you notice that?
Very much so. I think a lot of the people are spiritual pilgrims, that they had reached a point of almost despair about the nuclear issue. In coming together with other marchers, they felt empowered. And at one point I said to a marcher, I'll never feel alone again. It has been such an incredible thing to meet you and know what you're doing. And she said to me, and neither will we, that it was important making those contacts. So they want to be open to that connecting, to that bonding with other people to build hope.
Someone was telling me that on the march, and I didn't partake in this, but I know you did, and maybe you can comment on it, but they were telling me that what impressed them was as the marchers were going along, and if people were sitting out on their porches or in their front yards and seemed in any way receptive, that they would break away from the march, stop and talk with the people, spend time trying to explain what they were about and what their concerns were, and try to draw those people into the dialogue. It struck me as a good part of it. Did you notice that while you were on the march?
I did. And they would just go over and sit on a porch, or a farmer in a field. They just walk out and not stop his work, just fall into step with him and walk along talking. But it wasn't didactic. It was always listening as well as talking. That openness really was a hallmark of the people that I met.
Mm-hmm. And I suppose that made a good impression on others. I mean, I haven't heard a lot of negative reaction. I don't know if you have, but I know whenever people encounter sort of a self-righteous attitude or aggressive kind of proselytizing of a particular position, they're often turned off and unhappy about it. I think somehow the marchers taught themselves not to do that, or someone had really helped them to know how to reach out to others in an open way. I noticed that even in the gathering after the prayer service. They seemed to be very at ease, and of course they had done it a lot by then, but open to people and rather low-keyed, I guess, is part of my feeling about it. How about your daughter was on the march, right?
Right, Emily. She's 9 years old. She walked with me from downtown Toledo after the rally out to Sacred Heart Home. And the next day we went home that night. We didn't camp with the marchers, but we started out at 8 o'clock the next morning and walked out to the Davis Bacik plant. And she walked half of that with me. She walked probably 12 miles that day.
Really?
Yeah.
So they try to travel 15 miles a day, is it? Something like that?
Right, that's kind of an average. Sometimes it's as much as 25.
Uh-huh.
And the Davis Bacik day was, they couldn't camp at Davis Bacik. So buses picked all of us up at Davis Bacik, took us to the campsite at Port Huron. But the next day took them back to Davis Bacik so they could walk those miles to the campsite, meeting people and talking again. So they didn't skip those miles even though they couldn't camp.
What were some of your daughter's reactions to all of it?
Well, I think she was just kind of overwhelmed by it at first, but she loves people. I think the first impact was just watching all those people. And the second one was to see how children were so accepted, that kids weren't a nuisance, they weren't underfoot, and they also weren't like condescended to, patted on the head, treated like they were cute. The kids are doing an important part of that march, too. I think it was neat for her to see children treated with that much respect. She had to put up her own tent. The children were fed earlier in the food line. That was the only concession I saw made to age. But she had to take care of herself.
Well, that's no doubt a marvelous experience and one that she will remember. You know, Pam, I think that the Peace March really functions symbolically in many ways, I think. It brings together many different ideas, and I think in some ways it is a measure of hope for us. It gives us a reminder that that peacemaking is important, that you have to persevere at it, that you have to put this one foot in front of another. You have to keep on the march. I think that the march itself had a symbolism like that to me. You see these people wending their way across the country, hard, difficult thing, dealing with food problems and how to remain clean throughout, and teaching the children, and all of these hard, gritty, daily kinds of things they managed to deal with. They managed to deal with the threat of failure at the very beginning. So in that sense, it came across to me as a symbol of perseverance, that we all need to keep going. We all have our own way of approaching the question of peace, but out of our Judeo-Christian tradition, the important thing is that we are peacemakers, that we persevere at it, and that we do it as well as we possibly can.
You've been listening to Reflections with theologian Father James Bacik, lecturer and campus minister at the University of Toledo. Today, Father Bacik talked with Pam Hollenbeck, who is director of the Peace Council of Northwest Ohio. The topic of this week's Reflections was the Great Peace March, a personal reflection. If you have any comments on today's show or suggestions for future programs, please write Father James Bacik, Catholic Campus Minister, 2086 Brookdale Drive, Toledo, Ohio, 43606. Funding for this program was provided by the Catholic Communications Commission of the Diocese of Toledo.